When it comes to cult films, it's common to hear film critics and audiences agree that some of these movies couldn't be made today. But Heathers not only exemplifies this sad reality, it goes even further, pushing every boundary of what is considered politically correct. From topics like bullying, violence, and even teen suicide, this satire of white teen movies starring Winona Ryder dared to laugh at all of our society's biggest taboos and at everything that, according to modern standards, should only be treated with seriousness. As you can imagine, it's going to be really difficult to talk about this movie without getting this video demonetized. If you'd like to see more videos about daring films, I'd appreciate it if you could leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to this channel. The story of Heathers started in South Bend, Indiana, far from Hollywood. A young man named Daniel Waters was fascinated by teen culture and how his classmates interacted. Back then, he wrote a column for his school newspaper where he made up exaggerated stories about his classmates' adventures. One of these stories was about a girl who was burned at a bonfire during a football game by 3 popular girls named Heather. The story got Waters in trouble with school officials, but everyone thought it was funny that the 3 popular girls had the same name. Even though he was a bit of a freak, Waters had big dreams of becoming a playwright or screenwriter. After graduating from college in Canada, he moved to Los Angeles in the mid-80s, hoping to make his dreams come true. But things didn't go well for him at first, and in 1985 he developed his ideas on the side while working at a video store. It wasn't until 1986 that he finished the first draft of Heathers, which he jokingly called the most pretentious teen comedy ever written. Unlike John Hughes's teen movies, which were highly popular at the time and showed a sweet side of growing up, Waters took a much darker approach. In his script, high school was a brutal battleground, and teenagers could be just as mean as adults. Heathers is about Veronica, a popular high school girl who hates the other popular girls, the Heathers. These 3 mean girls bully everyone at school, forcing them to fit in. But everything changes when JD, a cool and mysterious new student, shows up and convinces Veronica to kill one of the Heathers, making it look like a suicide. It works, and they do it again with 2 other bullies, starting a dangerous trend among the students. The original script was a massive 300 pages, filled with dark humor and a negative outlook. Given its length and twisted plot, pitching Heathers to a production company was going to be a tough sell. But Waters was not only confident he could do it, he already had a specific director in mind. The legendary Stanley Kubrick. One could say he was aiming a bit high for a first-time screenwriter. But Waters thought Heathers was like the Dr. Strangelove of teen movies. He believed that only Kubrick could really understand his script and do it justice. Waters sent the script to Kubrick over and over but never got a response. He was starting to lose hope when his friend Michael Lehmann offered to direct it. Lehmann had made a twisted short film in college called The Beaver Gets a Boner, about a terrible teenager who has to pay his debts to an illegal drug dealer. It's almost impossible to find online, but it's the kind of thing that would get you canceled or kicked out of film school today. Clearly, Lehmann was the perfect director for Heathers. Both Waters and Lehmann had a punk rock attitude towards high school and weren't afraid to make controversial movies. Despite being a first-time director, Lehmann brought a unique and edgy perspective to the project, which perfectly complemented Waters' vision for the film. And so, after giving up on his plans to contact Kubrick, Waters teamed up with Lehmann, and together they began developing Heathers. With a director in place, the Heathers script was picked up by New World Pictures, a B-movie studio founded in 1970 by the legendary Roger Corman. Denise Novi, a New World executive, was so impressed by the script's sharp wit and its unique mix of pretentiousness and naivety that she asked to be involved as executive producer. Getting such a controversial film made wasn't easy. The biggest problem was finding actors. Waters and Lehmann wanted to use real teenagers, not older actors who pretended to be teens. Many young actors had to turn down roles because their parents didn't like the script's themes. Heather Graham, for example, was a top choice to play one of the Heathers, but she was only 17. Her parents were shocked by the lines she'd have to say and quickly said no to the offer. While the script was making the rounds in Hollywood, a 16-year-old Winona Ryder picked it up and was immediately hooked. She could relate to the manipulative characters and the film's dark humor because of something that had happened to her. One of her classmates had committed suicide after being bullied, and the school had held a funeral where all the bullies pretended to be heartbroken. Ryder tried to contact Waters, but her agent stopped her. He had just gotten her a role in Tim Burton's Beetlejuice and begged her not to do Heathers, saying it could ruin her career. Thankfully, Ryder didn't listen and was just as persistent as Waters had been with Kubrick. The problem was, the producers wanted a more conventional beauty for Veronica. Waters was smitten with Jennifer Connelly after seeing Labyrinth. Winona Ryder was the opposite. She dressed like Lydia from Beetlejuice. So one day, she went to the production company herself, got a complete makeover at a hair salon to look like a popular high school girl, and finally landed the role of Veronica. The casting was still going on, and the team was worried about finding the right actor for JD, Veronica's mean boyfriend. A young Brad Pitt tried out for the role but didn't get it. He ended up in a bad horror movie that he's not too proud of called Cutting Class, which could have its own video. Even though he wasn't a big deal in Hollywood yet, Pitt told Lehmann that he thought the script was amazing. Christian Slater, who came in right after Brad Pitt, had a terrible audition. He was so frustrated that he threw the script down and stormed out. Lehmann thought there was something interesting about his attitude and also saw a bit of Jack Nicholson in him. The hardest part of casting was finding the right actresses to play the Heathers. Kim Walker, who was dating Christian Slater at the time, was finally chosen to play Heather Chandler. Lisanne Falk also auditioned well, but had to lie about her age to get the part, as she was 23 years old. It turns out she'd written a book called Lisanne, a Young Model, about her modeling career when she was 14. Daniel Waters loved the book and was amazed she was now auditioning for his movie. Lehmann liked her audition too, so she was cast as Heather McNamara. Shannen Doherty was the last Heather cast. She initially auditioned for Veronica and then Heather Chandler. She finally landed the role of Heather Duke, but only on the condition that she could keep her red hair. Lehmann wanted all the Heathers to be blonde, but Doherty's performance was so impressive that he agreed. That's why Heather Duke is the only redhead among the Heathers. The casting team faced difficulties finding actresses to portray Martha Dunstock, a girl who makes a tragic decision due to school bullying. The script required Martha to be severely overweight and a prime target for harassment. The casting directors hesitated to publish this description, fearing it might be offensive. They eventually discovered Carrie Lynn at a stand-up comedy show. Lynn wasn't an actress, but was immediately drawn to the script and the team's vision. Having experienced bullying herself, she understood high school life in a similar way, aligning with Waters and Lehmann's intent. She was committed to the role and suggested a scene where Martha stabs Veronica while shouting Heather as Veronica insults her. The scene was ultimately cut, but Waters acknowledges its darkly humorous nature. With the full cast and crew in place, filming for Heather started in the summer of 1988, just before Beetlejuice was released. In fact, the scene where Veronica and JD are lying in the garden was shot on the same night as Tim Burton's film premiere. The production had a budget of $3 million and a month-long shooting schedule. The team had to work efficiently and quickly, but executive producer Denise Novi says this also allowed them a lot of creative freedom. One of the scenes where Lehmann and Waters poured their hearts into was the opening scene in the cafeteria. Waters, with his trademark humility, wanted the scene to be as impactful as Connie's wedding in The Godfather, lasting 20 minutes and letting us see all the characters interact. While they didn't hit that exact mark, Lehmann put in a ton of work and created storyboards for every detail. To keep the Kubrick vibe going, he also asked the cinematographer to light the cafeteria like the iconic scene with Sergeant Hartman in Full Metal Jacket. The script had Veronica and JD meeting at the popular convenience store chain, 7-Eleven. Waters had packed the scene with references to their products, but the producers couldn't get 7-Eleven on board to let them film or use their brand. This kind of rejection was a common problem for Heathers, as no company wanted to be linked to a movie with such a dark and twisted take on sensitive topics. But the biggest rejection the Heathers team received came from the family of J.D. Salinger, author of Catcher in the Rye. In the original script, one of the Heathers was reading it, and the book was used to explain her death. But Salinger's family didn't want their novel tied to the movie, and the team couldn't get the rights. Waters had to rewrite the script on the fly, replacing Catcher in the Rye with Moby Dick, which was in the public domain. This really ticked him off, and in interviews and the original DVD commentary, he always talks about it with a ton of frustration, like it was the worst thing that happened to the movie. Like any indie film or short, Heathers had its share of filming challenges. The fraternity party scene was shot in a real UCLA frat house. Denise Novi describes it as the smelliest place she's ever been. All the rooms in that sequence are actually the same room with different decorations. The film didn't have a lot of special effects, but there's one scene that, when we saw it, we were all blown away. When Veronica burns her hand with the car lighter and JD uses it to light a cigarette, obviously Winona Ryder wasn't really hurt. The trick was to put a hot wire under Winona's hand. This was the only scene that Denise Novi wanted to cut from the film, as she didn't like seeing scenes of women hurting themselves. But with all the other stuff that was already in the film, Lehmann was able to convince her that it wasn't a big deal. Except for a few minor disagreements, the main film crew was able to shoot smoothly. Novi gave his artists full creative control, and both Lehmann and Waters worked well together with little conflict. The only real point of contention was the character Ryder played. Early drafts of the script showed Veronica as much more cynical, and during filming, Lehmann realized it was hard to relate to her. He especially noticed this in the scene where the girl and JD watched the students' testimonies on TV. In the original script, Veronica was cheering JD on, and they were both laughing at the situation. It was then that Lehmann saw the character was getting too dark, and after a tough discussion with Waters, he convinced him to change his approach. Other than that, the cast and crew had a blast during the month of filming and even threw a surprise birthday party for Winona Ryder on set. The only person who didn't get along with everyone was Shannen Doherty, who hated how her character used so much profanity and often refused to say the explicit lines. According to some cast members, she didn't realize the movie was a dark comedy and took her role way too seriously. But Novi said that even though it was stressful, it ended up being a good thing, as Doherty brought a really powerful realism to the character that wasn't in the original script. If we keep looking for connections to Kubrick, Heathers also has a crazy alternate ending similar to Dr. Strangelove. In the original script, the school blows up because of a bomb JD planted, and all the students end up at a prom in what might be heaven or purgatory. Winona Ryder said in an interview that, in another ending, Veronica thinks JD is right and turns the bomb back on. Before it explodes, Veronica gives a speech on the school steps, saying sarcastically that she was the only student who couldn't write their letter before dying. Then the camera closes in on her and goes black as we hear the bomb about to go off. This was the only thing the production company, New World Pictures, made the filmmakers change. They didn't want the main character to kill herself. Like that would somehow improve the movie's morals. The editing of Heathers was just as messy as the filming. When the first version of the movie was ready, Lehmann showed it to the crew and cast, and Doherty stormed out of the theater during the first few minutes. She was expecting a serious drama, but it was actually a comedy with a lot of dark humor. The only thing the movie was missing was the music. To make the soundtrack for Heathers, the team hired a young David Newman. He had worked on other projects before, but this one was a double challenge. Lehmann wanted a more electronic sound instead of an orchestral one, and the amount of music needed was way more than anything Newman had done before. The music has a kind of spooky feel with its arpeggios and synthesizer sounds. For a movie about teenagers, the Heathers soundtrack sounds more like a thriller from that time, like Michael Mann's Manhunter or any John Carpenter film. Besides Newman's music, the movie starts with a cover of Que Sera Sera by Sid Straw. The original version by Doris Day wasn't allowed because the singer didn't want her song in a movie with bad words. The producers also asked for a new song just for the movie called Teenage Suicide Don't Do It. The song was written by Don Dixon, and the band is listed as Big Fun, even though it's not a real band. With all this, Denise Novi was convinced that Heathers would be a groundbreaking film that would propel her to the top as an executive producer. She could already picture the actors expressing gratitude for launching their careers, and Michael Lehmann as her exceptional talent discovery. Moreover, Heathers had the dream of any producer. Its lead actress had just starred in Tim Burton's Beetlejuice and was one of the most in-demand actresses in the industry. That would ensure Novi her first commercial success, even if the critics didn't like the film. However, things didn't go as planned. Heathers premiered at the Sundance Film Festival with little notice, except for the news that the film's production company, New World Pictures, had filed for bankruptcy. Despite this, it managed to secure a release in March 1989. But it was a commercial disaster. It grossed approximately $170,000 in its opening week and failed to recoup even half of its production costs before being pulled from theaters. The reviews were also negative. In addition to the expected moral objections of the time, Lehmann's direction was widely criticized, and the script was deemed a mere excuse for teenage violence. The entire Heathers team's morale was at an all-time low. To generate additional revenue, the distributor renamed the film in Europe to Lethal Attraction, combining the titles of two popular movies of the time, Lethal Weapon and Fatal Attraction. Winona Ryder remained a staunch defender of the film. Even after its commercial failure and critical reception, she still insists that the script was one of the best pieces of writing she had ever encountered. Michael Lehmann attempted to move on from the disappointments, and Daniel Waters was prepared to return to his job at the video store. However, the fate of Heathers was about to take an unexpected turn. In a last-ditch effort to recoup some of the film's losses, New World released Heathers on VHS, and that's when everything changed. A group of teenagers discovered it and recommended it to their friends. There was a certain appeal surrounding the film, which had previously been largely unknown and was now appreciated by only a select few. Unbeknownst to them, that VHS release was transforming Heathers into a cult classic. Throughout 1989, rumors of a film that satirized all taboos and featured Winona Ryder began circulating among American high school students. The film found its true audience among the outsiders who sought something different. Gradually, Heathers gained more recognition, both positive and negative, and after several decades, it was reevaluated as one of the most groundbreaking films of the 80s. Today's critics acknowledge the talent of its creators, as well as their courage to defy conventional norms. Over time, the moral compass of society has changed, and what once bothered people about Heathers no longer bothers them as much today. However, other elements remain controversial. The bullying scene where a student is forced to shout that he loves large genitalia, along with the entire joke about the gay suicide pact, is considered by some critics to be one of the most homophobic scenes in the history of American cinema. Despite its mixed reception, Heathers has endured as a cultural touchstone. In 2010, it was adapted into a successful musical comedy. In 2018, it was remade into a television series, featuring a special appearance by Shannen Doherty. While the series received criticism from both fans and critics, it may eventually develop a cult following, similar to the original film that inspired it. Many may notice certain similarities between Heathers and the 2004 comedy Mean Girls, but there are a lot more than just similarities. The author of the book that inspired Mean Girls was a devoted fan of Heathers and succeeded in bringing Mark Waters, Daniel Waters' brother, on board as director. Mark always believed that Mean Girls was a lighter take on what Heathers could have been if directed by John Hughes. As for its creators, Denise Novi was removed from her position at New World Pictures after its bankruptcy and went on to work as a producer for Tim Burton. She and Daniel Waters later reunited to collaborate on the script for Batman Returns. Michael Lehmann continued directing commercials and films, although he remains best known for his work on Heathers. Winona Ryder remains a passionate fan of the film and cherishes it more over time. Perhaps influenced by nostalgia, the actress has always dreamed of creating a sequel, and there was even a concept circulating for a while. In this sequel, Veronica, now an adult, works in Washington for a politician also named Heather. If you're not convinced by the premise, don't worry, because Daniel Waters wasn't either. He initially opposed a Heathers sequel, but has gradually softened his stance in recent interviews. Like the teenagers in the film, Heathers was an emotional roller coaster for its cast and crew. It was a daring, unconventional endeavor that overcame numerous rejections, cancellations, and ridicule to emerge as an inspiration for anyone who, like Novi, Lehmann, Ryder, or Waters, is dissatisfied with the world around them and seeks catharsis through rebellion, satire, and dark humor. In 1979, Alien shocked the world and redefined popular culture. Yet, between films, the Alien franchise expanded into a universe of sequels, prequels, and even crossovers.